Most people spend their entire lives trying to become more successful, more spiritual, more magnetic, more healed, more powerful, more certain, more admired, more complete. They believe that divinity is something to accumulate, as if the soul were poor and the universe were a marketplace where sacred power could be purchased with enough desire, enough visualization, enough spiritual technique. But the oldest hidden teachings do not begin with more. They begin with the terror of less identity, less noise, less craving, less self-importance, less control, less internal architecture, less of the one who is always trying to become something. The forbidden doorway does not open when the ego becomes impressive. It opens when the ego becomes transparent. Beyond 0 point, there is a silence the ordinary self cannot survive. Not because the silence is hostile, but because the self is made of movement. The self is made of stories, memories, preferences, wounds, reactions, fears, names, roles, and hunger. It needs friction to feel real. It needs contrast to continue. It needs something to defend, something to desire, something to resist. True emptiness is not weakness. It is not laziness. It is not emotional numbness. It is not the collapse of dignity or purpose. True emptiness is the absence of false structure. It is consciousness stripped of the clutter that pretended to be identity. It is the sacred clearing where the monad can finally be known without distortion. The monad is not an object waiting in the sky. It is not a distant deity floating outside existence. It is the primordial unity before division, the source before name, the sovereign point from which all multiplicity appears. The monad is not reached by climbing the ladder of egoic achievement. It is remembered when the ladder itself dissolves. This is why the teaching is so difficult. The seeker wants enlightenment, but still wants to remain someone who possesses enlightenment. The seeker wants divine power, but still wants a self that can claim ownership of it. The seeker wants freedom, but often only freedom for the identity that created the prison. So the gate stands unmoved. It does not respond to spiritual performance. It does not open for beautiful language. It does not open for rituals performed without surrender. It opens only when the one who demands entry begins to disappear. Not destroyed in violence, but emptied in truth. And this is the paradox we must enter. The greatest power does not appear when the self becomes infinite. It appears when the false self becomes nothing. The monad is not found by becoming larger. It is found by becoming empty enough that the original light can pass through without obstruction. Many seekers speak of the 0 point as if it were the destination. They describe a neutral center, a field of stillness, a place beyond polarity, a pause between reaction and response. And this is valuable. It is a necessary threshold. The 0 point interrupts the machinery of compulsion. It gives the soul a moment to breathe outside the tyranny of automatic identity. But the 0 point can become another trap when the ego mistakes neutrality for liberation. The mind can become calm and still secretly remain the center of the universe. The body can relax while the hidden observer continues to say, "I am peaceful. I am advanced. I am beyond others. I have reached the place they cannot reach." This is the subtle survival of ego inside spiritual silence. It no longer shouts. It becomes refined. It no longer demands through anger. It demands through identity. It hides in the language of detachment. It wears the robe of serenity while quietly preserving the one who is serene. 0 point is the threshold, not the throne. It is the clearing before the deeper collapse. It is the place where noise becomes quiet enough for the real work to begin. But many stop there because the next step is terrifying. At 0 point, the ego can still witness itself being peaceful. Beyond 0 point, even the witness is questioned. Who is the one who claims to be neutral? Who is the one observing the silence? Who is the one calling this emptiness mine? Who is the one standing at the center of awareness and quietly naming itself awake? These questions are not intellectual games. They are blades made of compassion. The deeper path does not merely calm the self. It reveals that the self was never the sovereign center it believed itself to be. It shows that even the spiritual observer can be another internal structure. Even the witness can become a throne. Even peace can become an identity. This is why true emptiness feels like death to the ego. The ego can tolerate stillness if stillness makes it feel powerful. It can tolerate meditation if meditation confirms its specialness. It can tolerate spiritual practice if practice becomes a mirror of superiority. But it cannot tolerate the complete disappearance of ownership. Beyond 0 point, nothing remains for the ego to hold. No title, no claim, no spiritual image, no secret superiority, no inner empire. Only the vast, silent field before identity hardens into I. This is the doorway to monadic power, because the monad cannot pour through a vessel still crowded with self-possession. The ego is not always loud. Sometimes it is very quiet. Sometimes it speaks in sacred language. Sometimes it sits with perfect posture, breathes slowly, and calls itself awakened. Sometimes it hides inside the very practices that were meant to dissolve it. This is why the path requires ruthless tenderness. Tenderness without honesty becomes indulgence. Honesty without tenderness becomes violence. The ego wants to survive, and it will take any form necessary. If ambition is rewarded, it becomes ambitious. If humility is rewarded, it performs humility. If spiritual detachment is admired, it becomes detached in appearance, while remaining deeply attached to being seen as detached. This is the hidden danger of spiritual identity. A person can renounce the world and still worship the self that renounced it. A person can speak of emptiness and still be full of pride. A person can reject material accumulation while accumulating mystical status, subtle superiority, and invisible power. The ego does not care whether the throne is made of gold or silence. It only cares that it remains seated upon it. This is why true emptiness is not merely calmness. Calmness can still belong to the ego. True emptiness is the collapse of the claimant. It is not, I am peaceful. It is the disappearance of the one who needs peace to become identity. It is not, I have entered the void. It is the recognition that the one claiming entrance is also part of what must dissolve. The Buddhist tradition speaks of emptiness not as a blank nothingness, but as the absence of inherent, independent self-existence. Things arise through conditions. Thoughts arise through conditions. Emotions arise through conditions. The personality itself arises through conditions. The I that feels so solid is a process, a pattern, a temporary arrangement mistaken for a permanent owner. The Gnostic path speaks differently, but it too sees a false identity imposed over the deeper spark. The world trains the soul to identify with names, systems, wounds, fears, and roles. The divine spark becomes buried beneath a manufactured self. Liberation begins when this counterfeit identity is exposed. So the question is not whether you appear peaceful. The question is whether peace has become another costume. The question is not whether you can enter silence. The question is whether silence has become a possession. The question is not whether you believe in emptiness. The question is whether you are willing to become empty of the one who believes. This is stern medicine, but it is deeply loving. Because the false self is exhausting. It must constantly maintain itself. It must protect its image, defend its wounds, justify its desires, and convert every experience into personal meaning. True emptiness releases the soul from this impossible labor. It does not punish the self. It frees consciousness from pretending to be confined by it. Every human being carries an inner architecture. It is built from childhood impressions, survival strategies, family wounds, cultural programming, trauma, praise, shame, fear, desire, memory, and belief. It becomes the invisible house we live inside. We call it personality. We call it realism. We call it common sense. But much of it is only old structure repeating itself. This architecture determines what feels safe, what feels threatening, what love means, what power means, what silence means, what the body expects, what the mind avoids, and what the heart believes it deserves. Before awakening, most people do not live in reality. They live inside the architecture their pain constructed. To reach true emptiness, this architecture must be seen and allowed to collapse, not through hatred, not through self-destruction, not through rejecting the human story with cold spiritual arrogance, but through clear seeing. A structure cannot dissolve while it remains unconscious. The hidden room must be entered. The foundation must be examined. The walls must be touched. The first wall is narrative, the story of who you are, the story of what happened to you, the story of what you can never become, the story of who betrayed you, the story of why you are not free. Some stories contain truth, but even true stories become prisons when the soul mistakes them for identity. The second wall is emotional loyalty. Many people are loyal to their suffering because suffering gives them continuity. The wound becomes familiar. Fear becomes familiar. Longing becomes familiar. Even chaos becomes familiar. The nervous system begins to confuse familiarity with truth. To become empty, one must stop worshipping the familiar simply because it has been there for a long time. The third wall is control. The ego believes control is safety. It tries to arrange the future, manage perception, manipulate outcomes, and defend against uncertainty. But control is often fear disguised as intelligence. It is the refusal to trust anything larger than the personal mind. Monadic power cannot flow through a clenched vessel. The fourth wall is spiritual ambition. This is perhaps the most subtle. The desire to awaken can become another structure of becoming. The seeker builds an identity around progress, insight, power, visions, and superiority. But the monad does not respond to spiritual vanity. The monad is prior to achievement. It is not reached by becoming special. It is revealed when specialness becomes irrelevant. When these walls begin to fall, the inner world may feel empty, exposed, uncertain, even frightening. This is natural. The old architecture called itself home. but a prison can feel like home when one has lived there long enough. The collapse is not the end of the soul. It is the end of the structure that kept the soul from remembering its original vastness. The monad is the mystery before division, before self and world, before subject and object, before above and below, before seeker and sought, before sacred and profane. It is not one thing among many things. It is the primal unity from which multiplicity appears, the source point that does not need a second to complete it. To speak of the monad is already to move away from it, because language divides. Words create edges, concepts create distance. The mind says monad and immediately turns it into an object. But the monad is not an object the mind can place before itself. It is closer than thought. It is prior to the one who thinks. This is why emptiness is the doorway. The mind cannot seize the monad. The ego cannot possess it. The personality cannot become its owner. Any attempt to grasp it turns it into an image. Any attempt to use it for egoic power distorts it into a spiritual fantasy. The monad is known through surrender, not capture. In Gnostic language, the monad is the hidden source beyond the lower architectures of illusion. It is the divine origin before the soul became entangled in false identity. It is not merely a higher being, it is the ground of being, the original fullness before fragmentation. In Buddhist language, we must be careful. Buddhism does not require a permanent divine source in the same way Gnostic metaphysics speaks of the monad. Yet the contemplative bridge is profound. Buddhism points toward the empty nature of self and phenomena. When clinging dissolves, what remains is not a personal possession, but open, luminous, ungraspable freedom. The similarity is not in doctrine, but in direction. Both paths undermine the false self. Both expose the limitations of identity. Both demand the end of grasping. Both point toward a reality that cannot be entered while the ego remains enthroned. The Gnostic remembers the source. The Buddhist sees through the illusion of self. Both require a sacred emptying. Monadic power is not domination. It is not force. It is not control over others. It is not psychic spectacle. It is the power of consciousness, no longer fragmented by false identity. It is the power of a vessel aligned with what precedes the personal will. It is still, clean, sovereign, and impossible to manipulate from the outside. This is why the monad is terrifying to the ego and healing to the soul. The ego hears source and wants to become source-like in order to rule. The soul hears source and longs to disappear back into truth. The ego asks, "How can I use this?" The awakened heart asks, "What must be emptied so this may move through me without distortion?" True emptiness is often misunderstood as nihilism, as if the path were saying nothing matters, nothing exists, nothing is sacred, and nothing should be loved. This is a grave misunderstanding. Emptiness does not make life meaningless. It liberates life from the false meanings imposed by craving, fear, and delusion. In Buddhist wisdom, emptiness means that things do not exist as isolated, permanent, independent entities. Everything arises through causes and conditions. A thought is not a sovereign ruler. An emotion is not an eternal truth. A self-image is not a soul. A desire is not a command from reality. Everything appears, changes, and passes. This seeing is not cold, it is merciful. Because when the mind sees that its constructions are empty, it no longer has to be enslaved by them. Anger can arise without becoming identity. Fear can arise without becoming prophecy. Grief can arise without becoming a permanent world. Desire can arise without becoming a master. The ego fears emptiness because it believes emptiness means disappearance. But emptiness is the disappearance of false solidity, not the destruction of living presence. When the self is seen as empty, compassion does not die. It deepens. Love does not die. It becomes less possessive. Action does not die. It becomes less frantic. This is the great correction to spiritual ambition. The point is not to become an extraordinary self. The point is to awaken from the hallucination that the self was ever solid enough to be perfected. The ego wants enlightenment as a jewel in its crown. Emptiness removes the crown, the throne, and the one who needed to rule. Meditation becomes the laboratory of this realization. You sit, you breathe. Thought arises, thought passes. Sensation arises, sensation passes. Memory arises, memory passes. Identity arises, identity passes. Slowly, the mind begins to understand what the heart has always suspected. The one you defend is not as solid as you fear. This is not a call to reject your humanity. It is a call to stop mistaking your temporary formations for ultimate truth. You can still love, create, serve, speak, work, and live. But the center has changed. Life no longer has to orbit the anxious project of self-preservation. In this way, Buddhist emptiness becomes a doorway to monadic power, not because Buddhism secretly teaches the monad in the same language, but because emptiness clears the vessel. When clinging dissolves, when the false center softens, when the inner structures become transparent, consciousness becomes available to a deeper order than personal desire. The Gnostic path begins with a wound and a memory. The wound is the sense of exile. The memory is the sense that something divine has been forgotten. The human being looks at the world and feels both beauty and imprisonment, light and distortion, longing and confusion. Somewhere beneath the layers, the soul remembers a home it cannot prove. The Gnostics spoke of a divine spark hidden within the human being, trapped beneath ignorance and false rule. This spark is not the personality. It is not the social self. It is not the anxious identity built from survival. It is a deeper radiance, a fragment of origin, a hidden inheritance from the realm of fullness. But the spark is buried beneath architecture, beneath fear, beneath shame, beneath imitation, beneath the voices of the world, beneath false gods of status, control, pleasure, and obedience, beneath the endless machinery that teaches the soul to forget itself and call that forgetting normal. True emptiness is the clearing where the spark becomes visible. Not because emptiness creates the spark, but because emptiness removes what covered it. When the false self becomes quiet, when the internal rulers lose their authority, when the soul stops kneeling before borrowed identities, something ancient begins to glow. This is why the void is not merely darkness. The ego sees the void and thinks it is death. The soul enters the void and discovers that the darkness was only the absence of false light. Beneath the artificial brightness of ego, there is a deeper radiance, quiet, uncreated, sovereign. The Gnostic and Buddhist paths speak differently here. The Gnostic may speak of the spark remembering its divine origin. The Buddhist may speak of the empty nature of the self and freedom from clinging. But both expose the counterfeit. Both refuse to let the conditioned identity pretend to be ultimate. Both demand a direct seeing that cannot be replaced by belief. The monad, in this synthesis, becomes the primordial source beyond the structures that imprison consciousness. The spark is not empowered by becoming louder. It is empowered by becoming unobstructed. The more the false self dissolves, the more the spark shines without effort. So do not fear the void too quickly. The void may be the only place where the false gods cannot follow. The void may be the chamber where borrowed names fall away. The void may be the womb of divine remembrance. What you call nothing may be the first honest space your soul has ever known. Sovereign consciousness is not egoic independence. It is not the personality declaring itself untouchable. It is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is not spiritual arrogance dressed as freedom. True sovereignty begins when consciousness is no longer ruled by the internal structures that once impersonated the self. A person can shout about freedom while being ruled by fear. A person can reject authority while being controlled by trauma. A person can speak of sovereignty while obeying every craving, every trigger, every insecurity, every wound, every invisible program. This is not sovereignty. This is slavery with spiritual language. True sovereignty is quiet. It does not need constant announcement. It is the dignity of consciousness that has stopped outsourcing its center. It is the calm authority of one who no longer believes every thought, chases every desire, or collapses before every external pressure. It is not hardness, it is inner non-compliance with illusion. This is where monadic power becomes practical. When the vessel is empty, manipulation has less to attach to, flattery has less to inflate, fear has less to command, shame has less to poison, collective hysteria has less to possess. The person who has become empty of false identity is far more difficult to control. But this power must remain humble. The moment sovereignty becomes pride, the old architecture begins rebuilding itself. The moment emptiness becomes superiority, the ego returns wearing a crown made of void. The moment monadic power becomes my power, the channel narrows. The ancient metaphor of the hollow bone is useful here. The hollow bone does not create the breath. It allows the breath to pass. The flute does not own the music. It becomes empty enough for music to move through it. The awakened human being becomes like this, not passive, not powerless, but unobstructed. When action arises from emptiness, it has a different quality. It is cleaner, less desperate, less performative, less reactive. It does not need to prove itself. It does not need applause to confirm its reality. It acts because the moment calls, because truth moves, because compassion has become stronger than self-display. This is sovereign consciousness without self. Not the absence of human personality, but the end of worshipping it. Not the absence of action, but the end of action rooted in compulsion. Not the absence of power, but the purification of power until it no longer belongs to the ego that would corrupt it. The modern world is built to prevent emptiness. It fills every silence. It monetizes attention. It turns the nervous system into a marketplace. It keeps the mind flooded with images, opinions, outrage, desire, comparison, fear, speed, and stimulation. It does not want you empty. An empty person is difficult to program. To live the void in a hyper-connected world is an act of spiritual rebellion. It means refusing to let every signal enter the temple of your consciousness. It means understanding that attention is not a casual resource. Attention is the doorway through which worlds are installed inside you. Begin with silence before input. Do not give the world your mind before you have returned to the source within. Before the phone, before the news, before the messages, before the noise, sit in emptiness. Even 10 minutes of true silence can begin to loosen the machinery of external command. Practice the sacred pause. Before reacting, pause. Before answering, pause. Before defending, pause. Before reaching for distraction, pause. This pause is not weakness. It is the 0 point becoming conscious. It is the interruption of programming. It is the moment the soul refuses to be dragged by the first impulse. Practice inner subtraction. Ask throughout the day, what can be released right now? What story is being added? What identity is being defended? What fear is trying to become reality? What desire is trying to become master? Subtraction is not deprivation, it is purification. Practice becoming unavailable to false urgency. Much of the world's noise survives by convincing you that everything requires immediate emotional participation. But not every fire is sacred. Not every invitation is alignment. Not every conflict deserves your nervous system. Not every voice deserves entry. Practice embodied emptiness. Feel the body from within. Relax the jaw. Soften the chest. Let the belly breathe. Sense the space around the heart. Let thoughts pass without becoming architecture. Let emotions move without becoming identity. The void is not only a metaphysical idea, it must be lived in the nervous system. And finally, practice ethical power. Emptiness without compassion becomes cold. Sovereignty without love becomes tyranny. Monadic influence is not permission to dominate. It is responsibility to serve from clarity. The emptier the vessel, the cleaner the action must become. Power without ego must become blessing, not control. The journey beyond 0 point does not end in absence. It ends in a different kind of presence. Not the presence of ego, not the presence of performance, not the presence of a self trying to become divine. It ends in the presence that remains when the false center no longer interrupts the real. This is the secret most seekers are not ready to hear. You do not lose your life by becoming empty. You lose the illusion that was consuming your life. You do not lose your power by releasing the self. You lose the obstruction that kept power distorted. You do not become nothing in the meaningless sense. You become nothing that can be possessed by illusion. The monad does not need you to become impressive. It needs you to become clear. The source does not require a decorated personality. It requires a transparent vessel. The primordial frequency does not move through the crowded temple of ego. It moves through the silent chamber where nothing false remains enthroned. This is why true emptiness is the only door. Manifestation without emptiness becomes desire worship. Spiritual knowledge without emptiness becomes pride. Power without emptiness becomes manipulation. Healing without emptiness becomes attachment to the healed identity. Even awakening without emptiness becomes another story the ego tells about itself. But when emptiness is real, everything changes. Action becomes prayer. Silence becomes instruction. Creativity becomes transmission. Leadership becomes service. Speech becomes cleaner. Love becomes less possessive. Power becomes less personal. Life becomes less about constructing identity and more about allowing truth to move. The self does not need to be hated. It needs to be seen. The ego does not need to be violently destroyed. It needs to be understood until its false authority dissolves. The story does not need to be erased. It needs to stop pretending to be the whole of reality. This is the mercy of the void. So enter the emptiness with courage, not as an escape from life, but as a return to what life was before fear named it. Enter the silence beneath thought. Enter the stillness beneath identity. Enter the dark womb where the false self cannot breathe and the soul finally remembers the original light. Beyond 0 point, the monad waits without waiting. The gate opens without opening. The power returns without being claimed. And what remains is not the old I made stronger, but something far more beautiful. A human being emptied of illusion, filled with quiet divinity, and finally free enough to become a living doorway for the real.